believe in Britain. They say we can't do it. We say we can.
Brexitcast
From BBC 5 Live and BBC News.
Who knows about Brexit? No one's got a fucking clue what Brexit is.
Brexit is...
If there is some difficulty to have the agreement of the Brexit, is my fault.
What do you think about Brexit?
What's that?
This is the moment to chuck checkers.
A process which I can only describe as a dog's Brexit.
Remainers and leavers, that's going to end well.
It's like this mad riddle that no one knows what it is, right? So what's happened to that twat David Cameron who pulled it off?
You're joking. Not another one?
You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you?
And if we both leave and take back control, I believe that this Thursday can be our country's Independence Day.
Hello Brexiteers and welcome to episode 2 of the podcast, The Establishment Fights Back. This is now, quite clearly, Parliament versus the people. We are recording live here in Westminster on September the 15th. An historic 2 weeks has passed since our first podcast. Parliament has taken control and has now effectively launched a coup against the government, having Boris Johnson, the de facto Prime Minister, stuck in number 10 without real power, as they've mounted a coup without removing the government. Quite an extraordinary accomplishment. I think it is the world's first coup where the Prime Minister has been left in place, but the coup plotters have taken power, using the Speaker Bercow to aid their coup. This is now quite clearly the establishment against the people. The establishment is fighting back. They're using all their powers in Parliament, in the judiciary, in the civil service, in the media, to try and thwart the referendum result, when 17.4 million Brexiteers took back control and said, "We're in control, now do what we say." And what we're witnessing here is 3 years later, the establishment using every resource they have, and they have a lot of resources at their disposal, to be fighting back and saying, no, you got it wrong, we're now going to take control away from you, because Parliament is sovereign, against the people. An extraordinary political battle is now being seen across our TV screens on a daily basis. So we started with the Hilary Benn amendment put down by Mr. Hilary Benn, Labour MP for Leeds. This amendment mandated the Prime Minister to ask for an extension to Article 50. It even drafted the letter that the Prime Minister would have to sign in Brussels. How humiliating for a Prime Minister to go begging to Brussels with a letter seeking an extension until the 31st of January. Boris said to the rebels in his party that if they voted for the surrender bill, they would lose the whip and be unable to stand as a Conservative candidate at the next general election. Despite this, despite the threats, 21 Conservative MPs rebelled in Parliament, including the former Chancellor, Philip Hammond, Winston Churchill's grandson, Sir Nicholas Soames, and also Kenneth Clarke, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer. An extraordinary event. 21 Conservative rebels thrown out of the party. Just like that. Was this the plan all along? Was this the Dominic Cummings strategy of detoxifying the Conservative Party by throwing out the Remainer rebels so that Brexit could be delivered on October the 31st? And it would send a very clear message to the electorate, to the British public, that Boris was serious about leaving, that he was going to be absolutely ruthless in his dedication and his mission to leave on October the 31st. So 21 rebels were thrown out of the party, and new Conservative candidates were then selected in these seats. But obviously the rebels were not taking this lightly and said that they would stand as independents at the next general election against Conservative candidates in their seats. Philip Hammond has also said he will be taking legal action against the Conservative Party for what they have done. So that was an extraordinary event, considering for years it's been the Labour Party who were going to deselect their MPs. That was what Jeremy Corbyn's henchmen were doing in Momentum, deselecting their MPs. They didn't actually go through with it, but it's actually the Conservative Party that has gone through with the deselection. So what we are witnessing is the tectonic plates of Brexit, the tectonic plates of politics shifting through our eyes. Before our very eyes, we're witnessing history in the making as Brexit reshapes the political landscape in Great Britain. An extraordinary thing to witness, and from my point of view, an event that is long overdue. So we eventually will hopefully get to a position where the Conservative Party is actually Conservative and the Labour Party is actually Labour, not this mushy centre-ground moderate which Tony Blair and David Cameron embodied, this sort of consensus where we couldn't tell the difference between Nick Clegg, Ed Miliband, David Cameron, all went to the same colleges, all did the same PPE subject, all married each other's wives, a bunch of college kids that's never done a day's work in their lives. So, I think the future in politics looks good. We're actually going to get a real choice of the electorate, a real choice where we can change how the country is governed at general elections. We've also had 2 weeks of defections from these parties. We've had the resignation of Amber Rudd from the cabinet on the Saturday evening that dominated the Sunday newspapers. So she resigned from the cabinet, and she's also said that she will not be taking the whip and she'll be standing down at the next election. She came under intense pressure from her brother Roland Rudd, who's been bankrolling the Remain campaign, and he's been bankrolling the People's Vote campaign. He was actually a founding member of the People's Vote campaign. Very good marketing. He's involved in PR, so he knows how to market, but a very, very wealthy individual pouring billions of pounds into the Remain campaign, and she came under intense pressure from her brother to resign from Boris's government. We then saw Dr. Philip Lee cross the floor to join the Liberal Democrats at Prime Minister's questions. An historic event as Boris was on his feet in the chamber. Joe Swinson, the Liberal Democrat leader, entered Parliament with Philip Lee to take his new seat on the opposition benches. We've also seen, in the last 24 hours, Sam Gyimah also defect to the Liberal Democrats, and he was unveiled at their party conference in Bournemouth. So we're seeing the shifting sands of politics moving before our eyes. Brexit, this event, this historic event, similar to the French Revolution, shifting allegiances in Parliament, in the country, and it continues to cause these revolutionary events that we see almost on a daily basis. So after the Benn Amendment had been rammed through the House of Commons in a matter of hours, and then rammed through the House of Lords in a few days, we then saw Prime Minister Boris Johnson try to get a mandate for a general election, because obviously he then had a majority of -43. With the loss of the 21 rebels and further defections, he is now effectively in number 10 but without a majority in Parliament. So obviously the convention is that if the government can't govern, there should be a general election. However, with the Fixed Term Parliament Act, introduced in 2011 by the Conservative Liberal coalition government, this is not so easy. The Prime Minister cannot simply call a general election at their choosing. They have to get the consent of Parliament, and in fact a 2/3 majority. So Boris put down the bill to get a general election, and surprisingly, the opposition parties said no. They don't want a chance to turf out the government and install a new government, which is extraordinary considering that Jeremy Corbyn and every leader of the opposition parties had been calling for a general election for the last 2 years. In fact, they didn't bang on about anything else. Almost every election broadcast had a message that we need a general election now. But they voted no. Why? Because they were afraid of losing, and they were afraid that Boris would win a clear majority on a mandate to leave on October the 31st. They'd also said that they would agree to a general election, but only until the legislation had passed. The legislation then passed, and they said no, we must wait until the European Summit where we can guarantee the extension to Article 50. So quite extraordinary scenes in Parliament where Boris Johnson has lost 6 votes in Parliament. Every single vote he's had, he's lost. Quite extraordinary. But you have to wonder, is this the strategy of Dominic Cummings, increasingly pitting Parliament versus the people? And there are rumours that he has already been testing the election slogan of Trust the People in focus groups to see if it is a message that resonates with the public. So after Boris Johnson's decision to prorogue Parliament in the summer, Gina Miller and other legal brains, including the SNP's Joanna Cherry, decided to take the government to court, which is a common thing that they do. It's almost become a rich woman's hobby. So they took the government to court, and the government won in the English High Court, saying that the prorogation of Parliament was non-judiciable. They also won in the Northern Ireland Court. But, however, very cleverly, Joanna Cherry, who is an SNP Remainer fanatic, took the case to the Scottish court, knowing that the Scottish courts would view her case far more favourably than the English courts, because there's a fundamental difference between English law and Scottish law. It would also help the case of the nationalists, as it would further entrench those divisions between Scotland and England. And obviously we have to be aware that the SNP are desperate for this second referendum on Scottish independence, and the Scottish court dramatically found that Boris had been unlawful in his prorogation of Parliament, and he had in fact lied to the Queen about his reasons for proroguing Parliament. Quite an extraordinary judgment, a unanimous judgment from the 3 Scottish judges. So, Parliament had been shut down, MPs had returned to their constituents, but then this dramatic judgment came through. Would MPs be forced to return to Parliament because the prorogation was unlawful? We saw dramatic scenes when MPs were turning up in Parliament of their own will and saying, let us back in, let us do our job, let us represent our constituents. But the government said they were going to challenge the law and have the Supreme Court decide which court was right. So now all attention goes to the Supreme Court on the 17th of September, and they will decide which law is right, which interpretation. There will be 9 judges deciding the law, 2 of whom will be Scottish, 1 Northern Irish, and the rest English judges. We await that Supreme Court judgment on the 17th. What if they find in favour of the Scottish courts? Will Boris Johnson be forced to resign because he lied to the Queen? But the increasing speculation and expectation is that the Supreme Court will in fact side on the side of the English judges by taking the view that the decision to prorogue Parliament is non-judiciable. It was a political decision that is not, in fact, judiciable, meaning that it is not for judges to take a view about why the prorogation happened, because the government is arguing that it prorogued Parliament simply because it needed a Queen's speech and a new domestic agenda that the new government wanted to implement. However, the case against the government is that Parliament was shut down deliberately to stifle debate. It was deliberately shut down to stop the government being held to account by Parliament. So it was an act of executive fiat, was one of the words used to describe the decision to shut down Parliament. That was in fact the words of the Speaker, Mr. John Bercow, who dramatically announced in Parliament that he would be resigning on October the 31st. An incredible announcement that it brought shockwaves through Westminster. People said, why would he resign on that date? But it is clear it was a date deliberately set to make sure that he would remain in the chair up to October the 31st, so that any hint that Boris was going to get through a No Deal Brexit would be stopped directly by the Speaker. The Speaker is at the heart of the establishment plot, and he was needed to be in the chair on that date to make sure we could not leave on a clean break Brexit. That was deliberately done by Mr. Speaker himself in cahoots with Remain MPs that were patting him on the back in Parliament for what he has done, in cahoots with the European Commission. And here we have the fundamental plot at the heart of Brexit, at the heart of Parliament, to stop this happening. They will stop at nothing to make sure we do not leave on October the 31st. And in doing so, he's made sure that his successor will be chosen by this Parliament, this Remain Parliament, this sham Parliament, this disgraceful Parliament that is held in complete contempt by the British people. They will, in fact, decide who the new Speaker is. And it increasingly looks like the new Speaker will be none other than Harriet Harman. Harriet Harman, another EU fanatic, another politically correct, disgraceful woman that will be, no doubt, she will be governing and being a speaker in his image. She will be his puppet. She will take him as a role model. She will take his judgments as convention. And she will be making pronouncements just like he did. And I'm sure now that she will be the next speaker. She embodies the establishment, a grandee of the New Labour years when the centre ground and the one nation and the mushy centre and the politically correct progressive agenda was at the root of it. She was there, Harriet Harperson. So she now looks like the favourite to take over from him, and being a woman as well, that will help in her favour. So it all looks like the establishment plot is gathering pace as they desperately try to stop Brexit. So that concludes episode 2 of Brexiteers, The Establishment Fights Back. Tune in next time when we discover the judgment of the Supreme Court. We discover the conference season where Boris will make a dramatic speech. It'll be the speech of the conference season. Will he be applauded by members and delegates? And then we move on to the Labour Party. Will we see increasing motions saying that Labour's Brexit policy must increasingly be that they will campaign for Remain in a second referendum, which looks increasingly likely as they're pushed further and further to the Remain cause. So we have the party conference season to look forward to, we have the judgment to look forward to, and then we see that Parliament will return on the 14th of October for that dramatic Queen's speech. Will Boris be able to get his Queen's speech through Parliament, or will he be taken down in a vote of no confidence by the Remainers in Parliament, which increasingly looks very likely? It looks to me like the Remainers in Parliament are going to try and take out Boris and install a temporary government of national unity, led by either Mr. Ken Clarke or maybe Keir Starmer, someone who has cross-party support, but somebody not as toxic as Jeremy Corbyn. They will then go to Brussels, seek the extension, and then call a general election. So we're in for an increasingly febrile time, a very exciting time for us Brexiteers, but also very worrying times as we see our vote being cast aside, our vote being stymied at every single opportunity, as increasingly we look like a country governed by the courts, the Remainer courts, the Liberal courts. Extraordinary that we are not being allowed to question the independence of the judiciary. We must also take every judgment they make as sacrosanct, even though you look in America and the Supreme Court in America, where the judges are appointed by the president, because everybody knows that you get some liberal judges and you also get some conservative judges. Judges are not independent. That is not a controversial thing to say. It is merely a statement of fact that every judge has a particular bias based on their own experience of life and their own political outlook. So extraordinary things to look forward to, and I hope you'll tune in next time to Brexiteers, the podcast.